Ah,
Okay, I can see you. Can you see me?
got it.
Okay, great. I turned my
I
Wi-Fi
can
off. I
see
hope
you.
that's better. Um, okay. Okay,
Okay,
so
let's hope.
why
Let's
don't
hope.
I tell everybody a little bit about tonight's topic, and then hopefully we'll get started. So tonight's
Great,
topic was
great.
really brought to us by the Young Adults Committee that we have. So they kind of brought up the issue, talking about how they feel that parents don't necessarily understand them and don't necessarily understand the pressures that they're facing. There were, a variety of topics, and one of them, the main ones that really stood out was the idea that summer pressures can be very difficult for young adults, and it can be very overwhelming time for young adults. So what they said was they felt like it would be really beneficial and really helpful if they felt that parents understood the pressures that they were facing and what they were really going through. And this way, maybe there can be some helpful communication with parents and kids and, those sort of things. So, tonight's really just trying to get that message across and trying to help parents understand their young adults and young adults understand, how to communicate with their parents and talk about these issues. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so important, and I think obviously it's so
Right.
timely as we're coming up to the summer, and it's stress. It could be stressful all around, and so I think bringing this out into the open and having a discussion is going to, hopefully, we're going to give people some tools to see how to be able to communicate with their adult children, their teens, and also how the teens can approach their parents and not have it be something that is just going to be, the door gets shut and
Right.
there's no
Right.
communication. So
Exactly.
I think it's
Exactly.
great.
So
Fantastic.
let me just, paint a picture for everyone out there. And, if you have any thoughts that come up while I'm, painting that picture, feel free to comment, throw in some thoughts, anything that's happening for you guys. So I want everybody to, just picture it's summertime. It's the height of the summer. It's, maybe the end of July, the first week of August. It's a Sunday, and there's a party. There's a party that's coming. A lot of people are invited to the party, but this party is a QR code party or bracelets party. It's invite only. And, zoom in a little bit more, and there's a 21-year-old girl getting ready in her bedroom, right? And she's kind of preparing for this party. The thing is, she is not invited to this party. So now let me take you through her mind a little bit, right? She's on the phone with her friend, she's on FaceTime, she's trying to get dressed, she's in her room already for like an hour, and she's really trying to, put herself together to get to this party and to feel her best self. And all the while she's getting ready and she's thinking to herself, am I going to get into this party? Am I going to get rejected? Are people going to look at me like I'm weird, that I'm not invited? Why am I not invited? Is something wrong with me? And then while she's getting dressed, which outfit's going to look my best? Which one's going to make me look the skinniest? Which one's going to make me look the prettiest? Which one's going to make that person talk to me? Which one's going to make everybody else think I'm cool? Okay, now she walks out of her room and, she finally settles on the outfit. She feels okay. She's settling a little bit. And she walks into her mother, and her mother says, oh, that's what you went with. And now she says, oh, of course you have to comment, right? You comment on everything. You always have to say something about my outfit. And all the while she's thinking to herself, my mother thinks I look ugly. She doesn't approve of this outfit. There's something wrong with me. I must look fat. It's not a good outfit. Okay, but I don't have time. I just have to go to the party. That's it. My friend's here. She goes with her friends. She gets to the party. Of course, she's nervous, but she gets in. She goes to the party and she walks in. She's a little nervous. And now, there's this thought going on. Do I drink? Do I not? How many drinks do I have? Oh, my friend's talking to that person. Why is nobody talking to me? I feel a little awkward standing on the side. Should I look at my phone? Should I take it out? Right? What should I be doing now? Okay, so should I go get another drink? Is that what I should do? Oh, nobody talked to me today. Okay, maybe it's time to leave the party, right? I don't know. Maybe it's a little early, but I guess it's time to leave the party because nothing's happening for me here. So she gets home and, she's already feeling like super insecure about her day. And her mother says, oh, you home already? Wow, that was quick. Okay, like, did you talk to anyone? And she just says, leave me alone with all the questions. I don't want to answer your questions. I don't want to talk to you, right? Leave me alone. And she just storms to her room, and now she's super upset and she's super frustrated. And, that's the end of her day. Does this, does this relate to anybody? Is anybody, feeling like this relates to them?
Mhm. And so now I want you, for those of you that are parents, to think about innocently asking your daughter, oh, is that what you decided to wear? Or were your friends there? Who'd you go home with? Was everybody invited? Why are you home so early? How many times as parents do we make innocent, it's not even comments, it could be questions, right? We're concerned, we're genuinely concerned about our kids. And yet we ask a question like that and they shut down and we're left confused because we care and we want to know. So that's what we're doing here tonight, is to understand, and Bonnie, that was laid out so well, to really understand the pressure that our young people go through in the summer. And so that when we ask a question, and for us it's innocent, why they may be shutting down, or why they're taking it as an insult, or why they think we're criticizing us, we're criticizing them. So I wonder, how many people here could relate? We have young adults on the live and parents. What do you think of that
we have a
situation?
couple people, saying
Either
yes,
end.
100%, right? I think that a lot of people feel this way, right? It may not be the exact same situation. And again, the girl may be different, and maybe a guy who's feeling a different way, right? Or different sorts of pressures, different parents making different comments than that. Or, maybe the person is invited to the party and has their own insecurities, right? There's so many different situations that everybody, must be going through, because again, each person is living through their own lives. They're living, through their own perspectives and their own insecurities and their own experiences. So, whatever the story is, there's a story there, right? And everybody's thinking something. And so the point is, we want to try and understand, it's not necessarily to tell parents exactly what your child is thinking, because I don't know exactly what your child's thinking, right? It's to understand, why they may be shutting you down, or, why your parents may be saying certain things, and how to really just effectively communicate what you really want to be saying to your parents and what your parents really want to be saying to you.
Yeah, it's really important. And the thing is that it, on the parents' end, just asking innocent questions that also parents want to know, or are interested in. They're interested in their kids' lives. This is the best case scenario. What about summer being pressure for everybody, and parents wanting to be sure, or really wanting, not to be sure, but wanting their kids to feel good, to feel confident, to fit in, to belong. And so there's a certain element of pressure on the parents. But yet, what I think is really important, especially about this conversation, is that our teenagers and young adults are actually on the ground living it. So I think that it's really important to have tools in place and strategies and a sensitivity to start to really understand, oh, yes, I am the parent. Yes, I want to know, but do I really know how hard this is for my child?
And so how do you know?
Right?
How do you see? That's the real question, is how do you see what your child's feeling, or how do you understand what your child's feeling? And if you don't, how do you ask?
Exactly. Well, the first thing I think is to not, as a parent, to not assume we know what's going on inside the child, because there's a lot of parents that see their adult children or teens as beautiful and smart and talented and accomplished, and why aren't they confident? And that's, the parent sees them that way, but the young person may not necessarily feel that way about themselves. So I think as parents, we can't assume. We have to be able to really sort of clear
Yes.
our own slate and get interested in who our children are, like who our children are, and ask them, you know, what do you enjoy about the summer? What do you find hard in the summer? What are some of your triggers? Don't assume. I think as parents, sometimes we assume, or we're afraid to sort of take the ball with that, or maybe we don't bring the topic up. Our kids are going to shut down. But I think for parents, it's on us to establish safety so that our children will be willing to now start this dialogue with us and be able to communicate when they need to and
Right.
when the time is right.
And even, you know, on the side of the young adults, you know, maybe it also takes preparing, you know, your parents, what you may need from them, right? Having a conversation with them maybe before the summer starts, right? So that they can understand what you may need as the summer goes along, and saying to them, you know, hey, mom, hey, dad, hey, parent, hey, whoever it is, right? This is how I feel during the summer. The summer is hard for me in this way, and this is what, you know, makes me feel triggered or makes me feel stressed. And, you know, maybe these are some things that I don't talk about when I'm feeling, you know, even a little frustrated. Maybe these are things that I come to you and talk to you about when I'm feeling really calm. Or maybe these are things I don't want to talk to you about, and that's still okay. It's not because I don't love you, it's because these things trigger me, right? It's because this is my own personal insecurity. And, you know, bringing up the things that you do love that your parents do, right? Not only what you don't like that what they do, but, you know, I really love that you're so interested in my life. I love that you really want to know what's going on. But, you know, if I seem like I'm in a bad mood, just let me go, right? If I'm telling you I don't want to talk about it, you know, please don't ask me questions today, maybe tomorrow, right? Giving them that advice, and you know, maybe telling your parent, even as you start a conversation, what you may need from them. Maybe you come home from a party and you just simply say, today was a little hard for me, I don't want to talk about it.
Exactly. Exactly. I think that is so important. The preparing beforehand, before the summer starts, having a conversation when you're both calm and you're not in the thick of it, I think is so important. And I also think that what you said, Bonnie, in terms of having the young adult or the teens say, exactly, here's what I need from you, right? And for the parents that are watching, your teen or your young adult may not have that language. So you grab the language and say, how can I help
Right.
you when it gets hard? What can I do if I sense that something's going on? It's important to me that I can, support you or encourage you, but I want to give you the space, but I also want you to know. So tell me how I can be helpful
Right. And
to
somebody said it
you
in the
this
comments
summer.
over there. They said, you
So
know, setting those boundaries. And that's exactly what you're doing, right? How we talk about things, what we talk about, that is what you're doing. You're setting those boundaries with your parents or with your child.
100%. And now one of the things I have to say, and I'm obviously a parent, is that it's, as parents, one of the most important things that we can do, and that is probably the hardest thing to do, is to what we call in coaching, self-manage. And self-manage is to know when you're getting kicked up as a parent, right? Your your daughter comes home and you tell her, who brought you home? Did you get a lift? Who drove you home? I don't want to talk about it. And now as a parent, right, what happens as soon as our kids say, I don't want to talk about it, right? What happens in our minds is, oh my God, is she okay? Did something happen? And it's all with the best of intentions, but it's really important that if we want to keep the lines of communication open with our children, we have to be able to take care of our own feelings so that we're not sort of spilling out all over them, because they just came from the party. They're having all this pressure. They may not even understand how they feel about something, but something's up. And we really want to keep those lines of communication going with the parents and their and your children. But the most important thing for the parents is to know how to, when they're getting activated, when you as a parent are either getting angry, they're shutting you out, they don't want to talk to you. But I'm so good to her. But I took off all her clothes. But I this. But what do you mean what do you mean you don't want to talk to me? It's so important to be able to say, "Oh, I'm having feelings now." And I think in terms of parents, there's definitely some tools here for us parents, and that is to think about before going into the summer. First of all, what are the things that you're worried about? Whether it's about you, yourself, your children, your body, your activities, your socializing. Because if we don't have awareness on how we're doing, if we don't feel like we're on solid ground, then our insecurities are going to come out on our children, and that's not fair to them, right? So I think that first and foremost, we have to know, okay, what do I need to do to have a good summer? What do I need to do to take care of myself when my feelings get kicked up? Because, parents will still go in. I hope my child meets someone. My daughter's two of her friends are dating, they're getting engaged. And so that sits in the back of the mind. But what a lot of young people say is they feel their own pressure and they feel the pressure of their parents sort of pushing up against them.
Right.
And that's really important.
I think that even recognizing, well, first of all, the young adults also having some awareness, you come home and not necessarily something happened, right? You may just be in a bad mood. And so you recognize you're in a bad mood, take some space. That's the biggest thing. Take that space, whether it's going to listen to some music in your room, calling a friend and just venting about your day, going to take a shower or a bath, doing something that really just, brings you back down and grounds you and calms you. That is probably going to be, one of the biggest things that you can do in that moment, because when you feel a little bit more calm and relaxed, you'll be able to revisit that conversation with your parent, right? So even if your parent starts with a question and you're in a bad mood, I'm in a mood, right? I'm in a mood. And you know what? It's so
Yeah.
normal and it's so human to feel upset and to feel sad and to feel whatever it is that you're feeling, right? So, okay, I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling upset, or I'm feeling frustrated, and I had a long day and I'm really stressed and I just need a second. I'm going to take some space.
Yes. I love that, the simplicity of that. And then it's on the parent to respect the boundary. And sometimes, a parent might be busting, but wait, and also with the best of intentions, we care. But it's really important for us to allow our young people to take their space and to really respect their boundaries. But then that means that we have to deal with our own feelings. And we have to be able to say, okay, for those, some parents may feel like, okay, great, it's okay, I can do that, great, they're taking their space. But it's important for, that self-awareness as parents. What's going on for me right now? What am I telling myself? What thoughts are going through my head? Because it's really incumbent on us to be able to calm ourselves down so that they can take their space. And, the other thing is, and we discussed this, is that, as parents, we tend to think that we know what our kids are thinking. We know, we assume that they're just like us, or whatever it is that we went through when we were younger. We carry those little, battle wounds with us from our, teenage years. And those are our sensitivities as parents. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily your daughter's or your son's insecurities. So,
Right.
try not to assume.
I think that's a huge point to make is, your kids are different from you, and each kid is different from the other. So, you being a size, A might be so exciting to you, but your daughter being a size B might be so exciting to her. And, in that sort of sense, she might be happy. Just because you would think she wouldn't be happy because you couldn't be happy, that doesn't mean that she's not happy. Or just because, she may not go to the party and be so happy and so relaxed and, do her own thing. You know, that doesn't mean anything's necessarily wrong, but just because you may not understand, like, how could she be happy? Maybe she is, right? And that's the biggest piece to look at is my child happy? Because if my child's happy, that's all I can ask for, right? If my child's well and high functioning and, like, really, really living their life the way that they want to live it, the way that they feel their best selves, that's how you know that they're doing what they need to be doing. If it comes to, their
Right.
atypical behaviors and, their sleep disturbances and the lack of motivation, isolation and really like socially isolating, not speaking, fatigue, those are signs, that maybe your child is struggling, right? But just because they're not at a
Yeah.
party, or just because, they're not eating a certain thing, or they're not looking a certain way, or they're not hanging with a certain crowd, that doesn't make them unhappy.
Exactly. Exactly. And sometimes, a parent may say something and then, like the child is more like, oh wait, should I be upset about that? Or like, oh wait, I feel comfortable in my body. Wait, am I fat? And so, sometimes when we don't realize that we're, a lot of times what's important to us is not necessarily important to our kids. And so we really need to like get interested in, not assume, but ask, you know, like, what are your pressures? Where do you feel good? What did you enjoy? And get curious rather than trying to get in there and assume, that something's wrong. That's the other thing. I heard you use the word, we all use the word wrong. Oh,
Yeah.
my child comes in, they're quiet today. Something's wrong. And, nothing's wrong, right? They're human. They're having feelings. There's so much action out there. There's so much going on, even in the
Right.
best days of the summer. There's a lot to take in. There's a lot. And it doesn't mean
Right.
they're wrong. A parent may be an extrovert, their child
Right.
is an introvert. Doesn't mean that the child's unhappy, but the parent thinks why aren't they going out today? Why don't they want to go to the
Right.
beach?
And even,
Something's
I like to look at
wrong.
it a little bit like something more, let's say inflexible, like the color of your eyes, right? Okay, so your daughter's eyes are brown and yours are
Hmm.
blue, or opposite. It's just a difference in a person, right? So that just means that your kid can be different from you. It doesn't mean that something's off, it just means the kid's different. And I like that you said that even the idea that something can be wrong. I think even sometimes kids come home, let's say, upset from a party or, uh, frustrated from their day or stressed out from something. And the parents automatically say, oh my God, like something's wrong. I have to fix this for my child. And this is a big piece, especially when having adult children. This is probably one of the hardest boundaries to set, because when your kids are young, yeah, they're, a little bit more in your responsibility and you take care of them. But as they get older, it becomes their jobs to take care of themselves. And so this is a big piece, right? Your daughter comes home from a summer party and she seems upset. Yeah, you want to fix it because you love her. But it's not necessarily your job to fix. And it's not necessarily that something's wrong. It's just that your daughter is human and she's stressed out from her day, and it'll pass.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of it comes down to pausing, as a parent, like taking a breath, don't take it personal, and then being able to approach it. The other thing is I think that in the summer, houses are full, families are together, lots of kids, lots of parties, all age siblings, and timing is everything. It's so important to you know have to approach your child when things are calm, when the house is spinning, or and
Yeah.
sometimes we're excited for our kids. They look amazing. Oh my God, we heard it was going to be the best party. We want to know, but in our enthusiasm, it's again, it's just about like, okay, wait,
Right.
let me take a minute, let me step back, and let me see when he or she wants to
Yeah.
talk about it.
Maybe
That's the
asking,
other
do you want
thing.
to
And I
talk
think,
about it? Yeah, when do you want to talk about it? Later, tomorrow, today. I'm here for you, right? There was
I,
a question that
I
I just
love
want to,
that.
a few questions, but somebody commented and said, would you even say to be your child's friend? So, as a young adult, I want to, just answer that, let's say from my perspective or from a young adult perspective. I would say it's totally okay to be your child's friend, right? To a certain extent, right? You want to set those boundaries that parents and children, need to have, of course. That's a little bit different from what a friend is to a parent. But I think that the way that today's generation is being raised is a little bit different than, Alice, you can tell me more, but from, that generation, because the way that people are being raised today is a little bit more, open communication, more about feelings and emotions and talking about things, and a lot more open communication, which, in a way is super beneficial for these relationships and to really connect with your kids in a way that, parents may not have, years ago. So I do think you can be your child's friend, but also, when you see that your child feels, a little bit more of a need to take that lead, let them. They say, I want a second, let them take a
Mhm,
second, right? They say, I don't want to talk about it. That's
mhm,
okay.
mhm. Absolutely. And, I think, I mean, we want to, of course, feel like we're friends with our children. But at the end of the day, if a young person, you know, whether they're struggling or not, there's a certain point where the parent is the parent. So, in other words, they're going to need their parents. Like, I'm thinking a lot about, what if, there's so many different scenarios and situations. Like, what if a parent is watching something go down with, one of their daughters and her friends, and they can see maybe the friend is being a little abusive or is using her, and like, as a parent, sometimes we can see things a little more clearly because we're on the outside of it and we want to be able to say something. And sometimes even, children, adult children, teens will say, well, what do you think of that? And then a parent will give the answer, and then the child gets defensive. So I think also it's important to think about ways to be able to say, like, as a parent, like, oh, I see, so and so, didn't have you or hasn't been calling you.
Right,
Would you
right.
want to talk about
Bringing
that?
it up in a sensitive way, right? Like, I noticed that this is happening with you and your friend, or I noticed that you're coming home from the parties and you seem upset. It doesn't necessarily have to be, I see you coming home from the party. Say, I notice, like, I'm noticing, I'm looking at you, I'm in it with you, and I'm recognizing your feelings, right? So I notice that you're coming home and you're seeming upset, or I notice, this is happening with you and your friend. I'm always here if you want to talk about it, right? And this goes to a question that somebody asked also, is how do you support and encourage your children? By letting them know that you're there for them, right? Whatever it is that they may need, you're noticing them, you're aware of what's going on, but you're not necessarily going to push them to a point that they don't want to be at. You're going to let them make their own decisions while also helping them when they want it, right? And yes, unconditional love, showing them I'm here for you whenever you want to talk about it, and I'll always be here for you. I'll always be here to listen to you, and those type of comments to your child, just to let them know, no matter what you need, I'll be here for you.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that sometimes another scenario is, a young adult, a child will come home and want to talk about, do you want to hear what happened, with this person, or like, they're really worked up about it. And sometimes, the parent will jump in, because it seems like their adult child wants their advice. But very often, I think that's even a place to slow it down a little bit and to hear, really, to just listen. It's such a fine line. We really want our parents to be there for us and hear us and understand us, but it's a fine line then with, like,
Right.
with them fixing us. Nobody wants to feel
Right.
like their parents are trying to fix them or control them. So I think in those situations, even for the parents, it could, as they're listening and when your child is done talking, to even ask, would you like some feedback? Would you like,
Right.
would you
Right.
like a
Even on
suggestion?
the young
Would you
adults,
like,
on the young adult side, I think it's also important to recognize that growing up is a hard thing to do, right? Going from, childhood to adulthood is a very difficult stage to be in life. And so we're used to our parents, catering to us and taking care of us and all these things. And then all of a sudden it becomes, you know, okay, I want you to cater to me and I want you to help me when I want you to help me, but then don't talk to me when I don't want you to talk to me, right? And so these are also things for us to be aware of, for the young adults to be aware of, is, you know, we can't get both sides. There's a certain point where you have to adult and you have to grow up. And so that's going to come with, sometimes not having your parents' advice and making decisions on your own, or sometimes, your parents always going to be there, but, having to act like an adult and take on more responsibility, for your own decisions and things like that. Because I think that's also a difficult part is, we want to be adults, but we also want to be kids at the same time. So that's also where, the difficulties with
yeah,
being a young adult, in a family becomes a little bit more difficult.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's that push pull of wanting independence and wanting your parents to to be there for you and to
Yes.
feel babied at times, to feel taken care of. But again, I think that's why the asking, on both ends, or at least from the parents, well, how can I help you in this situation? What do you need from me? And then, they get to say, I need some space, or, you know what, I need I might need a suggestion, or I need your advice, or whatever it is. I think though, asking, what do you need? There are certain things that parents are going to want to know. I mean, there's certain
Yes.
boundaries and curfews and things like that. And I don't think, I think it's a good thing actually that, each, the parents have certain, bottom lines for the parenting part,
Yes.
the responsibility of
Yes.
the young adult, and also for the children and the teens to be able to also know on their end, what's important for them, like that, and that they have to be accountable also. It's a relationship, and it's not, it's messy. I think we have to leave room for for the occasional
Yes.
outbursts or the
And that's
slamming
and that's
door.
human, right? And that's part of
Yeah,
being human, is
yeah,
getting upset and yelling at your parents or yelling at your kids. And this is a part of being human, and these things are going to happen, and there's nothing wrong with them, right? You may not feel so great afterward, and you may go back and apologize, but you can always do just that. I'm sorry I yelled at you, right? I'm sorry I made that comment to you. I know how sensitive you are to that topic, and next time I'm really going to try my best. But
hmm
all anyone can really do is try their best, right? But you come home and you're moody and you yell at your parent, it's, you're human. You're not a bad daughter, you're not a bad son, you're not a bad mother, you're not a bad father. You're a human being.
exactly. And learning, we're all learning. It's a constant evolving of, as a young person's, their identity and getting out into the world and their responsibilities, and
Right.
they're evolving. And I think as they evolve, we have to, evolve as parents, or at least be able to meet them there. And a lot of that comes from, you know, our own self-awareness, our own, wait, am I
Yes.
doing to my daughter what my mother did to me? And I knew my mother loved me, but my daughter doesn't care about that, or it's a different generation, or
Or maybe opposite, right? Like my mother never asked me questions. Maybe I have to ask all the questions in the world now.
exactly, exactly. But I think also just the transparency and the willingness to like get up the next day and like try again. And if if your child or your teen snaps at you, the next day and says, you never say the right thing, you don't care, as a parent, you take a breath and say, okay, so what would have been more
Yes.
helpful for me to say to you in
Yes.
that moment, right?
Yes.
So you're also like, you're teaching your child to locate their own needs, because like, these things are moving fast and they don't even know. So you're asking them, how do you need me to be with you? What would have been a more supportive or encouraging
Right.
response?
Right.
And that,
I think that's a great point is, so your child blows up on you. So now what, right? So staying calm if you can, and just questioning, what can I do for you in this moment? Or if you feel like you can't stay calm, put a pin in the conversation and revisit when you are calm. And same thing for the young adult, right? Your parent, is saying like, no, but I just want to know, and your parent's not necessarily understanding what you're trying to tell them. Okay, so stay calm and try and explain it to them in a way that they'll understand it. And if not, put a pin in it for when you know that your parent seems a little bit more calm and is more willing to open up that conversation, right? Because there will just be certain times your parents will have had a stressful day too, and will be dealing with their own issues and not necessarily related to you. And it can just be, the stress of being a parent to many kids, the stress of a lot of different things, right? So again, if you notice that your parent is not really having the headspace to have that conversation, come back a different time. And the same thing for the parents with the kids, right? Revisit when you're both in that state of mind to have that conversation. Because if you're both stressed out and super, super frustrated, it's probably not going to be an effective conversation.
100%, 100%. I think that, as we said earlier, timing is
Timing.
everything. And I've been saying lately, I said it earlier, the right suggestion at the wrong time is the wrong suggestion.
Yes.
A lot of times it'll fall on deaf ears. When your child really just wants you to hear them and empathize, or just understand, or not say anything, just hold the space,
Right.
to put in a suggestion, which might be a great suggestion, a valuable suggestion, something would help. If the timing is wrong, it goes out the window, right? So we really want to try to meet each other where we're at. And it takes both sides, like you said, like the young person, if your parent is in that mood, put a pin in it.
Yeah.
Not now. This isn't the time. The other thing I want to say is that, when we communicate, to communicate in the I as opposed to the you, right? You're
Yes.
always
Yes.
yelling
I
at me.
statements.
Yeah, right. I see.
I
You're
statements.
always
I
yelling
feel.
at me. Right.
It's always
Instead
I
of,
feel.
right. I feel uncomfortable when you dig into me this way, or I feel like this, I feel uncomfortable, not you're so annoying. I think there's certain patterns of speech. You're so annoying, Mom. But I think a parent might be able to hear it more when you're able to say, I feel really crowded when you're like on top of me when I walk through the door. I feel crowded, not you're this, you're that.
Right, because it really takes away, you go to somebody with a you statement and you say, you're crowding me. It's automatically putting the blame on that person. That person's automatically on the defense, right? The second you can say, I feel crowded, you're not necessarily doing anything wrong, but it's the way I feel, right? And again, also, nobody can take away from the way you feel.
Right.
Nobody can say, no, you don't feel crowded. I do feel crowded. That's the
Right.
way I feel, right? So that, first of all, gets your point across. It also shows that this is about me. It's not necessarily about you. This is about me, right? And when you can say, I feel frustrated and I feel stressed and I feel crowded and I need a second, that will go across way better than you're stressing me out and you're crowding me and you need to give me a second.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You always do this to me, right? As soon as the you comes out, we go on the defense mode, and we're really not able to hear each other as well. So it is important to put it in the I. And yeah, and also I don't think there's anything wrong with a parent saying, oh, I didn't realize, I was just, I was a little nervous when you didn't pick up the phone when you called. Oh, I'm sorry I snapped at you. I was feeling a little nervous because it got late. So, right.
Your kids are old enough at this point, right? If they're young adults, they're old enough to understand that you also have your own feelings, and they're old enough to understand, to really be able to join that conversation and to see where you're also coming from, because that also helps build that relationship with you, right? When a parent can come to the kid and say, I'm sorry, I was worried about you today, right? That's why I called you.
Mm-hmm.
I called you because I was worried about you.
Mm-hmm.
The kid can say, my parent loves me, right? As opposed to just saying, like, I was just calling you and not necessarily explaining yourself to kids, like, my mother doesn't leave me alone, right? When you
Because it
can
comes off
explain it,
as my mother doesn't trust me,
right,
right? But when a parent says, I'm calling because I love you and I'm worried, it's it puts a little more clarity into the conversation. And a lot
right,
of times I think we have to read through the lines, on like with parents, notice the signals, the body language of your kids.
yes,
Sometimes they'll stand there and say, okay, they want to talk, but really clearly, like,
right.
it's
Right, the kids coming home from a party and yelling about their day and saying, I had the best day ever. Oh my gosh, it was the most fun party of my life. Okay, so now you can question, oh, it was. I'm so happy to hear that. Why don't you tell me about, or do you want to tell me about it? Right? Maybe not, why don't you want me, but do you want to tell me about it? I'm so open to hearing what you have to say. And, if your kid's coming home and seems quiet and down and, just walking in with the head down, that's a sign that maybe your kid didn't have the best day. And yeah, you can let them know, I'm here for you, but, they may not be open to hearing that in that moment. They may
Mhm.
need a second to just process whatever happened to them that day or whatever they were feeling that day. They need a second to process their own feelings.
Exactly. And I think those moments of trust, like when the parent steps back and lets them have the moment, I think that will build trust, or more moments where a young person can see, like, oh, my parent really is trying, and they're trying to give me, some space.
Right.
And I think that just creates, just a relationship where they ultimately may feel a little more comfortable to go to their parents when there is something that they need them with. But I
Right.
think but I think for the parents, and I'll just put a plug in for those of us of my generation and a little younger, there's pressure on the parents too. We want our kids to be safe. We want, risky behaviors, party, drinking, um, dating, friends being included. It's more pressure on your child because they're living it. But I think we have to have some compassion for ourselves as parents, and we have to have tools to deal with our own uh, worries or stressors or insecurities, or so that we're able to we don't bring it into our interactions with our kids. And that takes time. It's very
Yeah.
hard for a parent to let go of
Yeah.
control, right? It's hard.
I think that, the start of anything is really that awareness piece, right? Being aware of your own feelings, your own beliefs, your own views of things. And, that allows you to recognize, okay, this is my anxiety. This is my worry.
Mhm.
This is my insecurity. Or maybe, even being just aware, I'm feeling stressed out right now. So maybe now's not the time to talk to my child, right? That awareness piece will help you recognize where you're coming from, right? And same for the kid. It's, I'm feeling insecure, right?
Yeah,
I'm feeling anxious about this. And the second that you can be aware of where you're feeling anxious, you can recognize, okay, that's why I'm getting defensive, or that's why I'm getting upset. Not necessarily my parent means to insult me. They don't, right? It's not even necessarily an insulting comment. Sometimes it's just a small comment that they'll perceive as, this is insulting, because that's already an insecurity that we're feeling.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, just being able to name like what we're feeling from either side of whether it's the young adult or the teen, like just knowing, like, oh, I'm feeling disappointed,
Right.
or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling excited. I met somebody, but like just knowing what am I feeling. And I think because what's so important about that, and to take this over to the parents, is that, when we're always watching our kids. That's what parents do, right? It's like we want to protect them. We want to give them the best life possible. We want to know they're happy. And yet, when we see something's up, it's important for us to stop and say, "Oh, wait, what am I feeling?" Right? Like, who'd you ask your daughter, who'd you come home with? Oh, I had to get a ride with I don't my brother because, or so and so because all my friends went home with their boyfriends. And then sometimes with the mother, she'll get like, there's feelings that come up. What's the feeling, right? So the feeling might be worry, right? Like, when's it going to be my daughter's time? Or is my daughter okay with that, right? But we have to name the feeling for ourselves and the thought behind the feeling, because a lot of times we react from a thought, like a belief that's like blaring in the background, like something bad's going to happen, right? Like, oh, they're going to the party, my son is drinking. You get angry. Wait, what's the thought behind that? Oh, something bad's going to happen. There's going to be an act, God forbid, something bad's going to happen. Or my daughter's never going to get married. She's not going to get married. Like, but those are not true. So it's like, what am I feeling? And what's the thought behind there? Like, what am I believing is true? Because it's not. It's 99.9% of the time, it's not true. Right. Your child is good enough. But if we're reacting to our own fears, it spills out onto our children, and then it's like another layer of pressure.
And the children sense it, right? The children totally sense it. They sense when the parent's feeling stressed, or they sense where the comments can be coming from, and that's really a part of the conversation, is recognizing, my awareness, the parents' awareness, right? Young adults both recognizing, okay, this is what's happening for the both of us, and kind of like depersonalizing a lot of it, right? And recognizing it's not necessarily personal. It's not necessarily an insult towards me. It's right. My mother or my father has their own views and their own beliefs and their own experiences that can be impacting them.
Absolutely. And I think also it's important to know that not every issue has to constantly get worked out with each other. Right. Sometimes your child, it might be better served talking to a good friend, maybe a mentor, maybe a teacher of them. I'll tell parents a lot of the times, I'll say, your kids know you love them, but it doesn't mean they're going to come to you, because they also know how, I always say, and they could see right through us. They know, they're on to us. They know what our expectations are too, what our wants and our hopes are for them. And so it's hard. So sometimes, if you're a parent who's having an issue with your child, if you've tried, to work it out, maybe you need to, turn to somebody you trust, or, to get perspective on your end, right? It's not always going to be, we're going to get the answer together. Sometimes we need that space to, lean into other resources or relationships that, sometimes a friend will say, oh, your mother loves you. She doesn't realize when she says that. And then, the kid gets a little bit more perspective, but it doesn't only have to be tell me, you tell me, or do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think it has to be.
It doesn't always have to be, such a conversation between the two, because sometimes it's also just about working on your own self.
Exactly.
Right. And that's really what it can be about, right? It's about, the child working on themselves and the parent working on themselves, because that is probably the best thing that you can do in any relationship, is to work on yourself first, right? And to recognize what you need first, right? Or what what you feel, what you may need in that relationship, because the only way you're going to be able to communicate what you need is if you actually know what you need.
Exactly. And it's asking those questions. It's, saying like, oh, wait, what do I need in this moment? Right. And again, if your child doesn't have those words, ask them, how can I be helpful to you?
Right. And sometimes you don't necessarily know what you need in that moment. Right. Exactly. But maybe you know what you're feeling, or what feels, not so right to you. You take it from there and you go along as you go. But sometimes you don't always know exactly what you need in that moment, and that's okay. And don't be afraid to tell your parent, I don't know, right? I don't know if I just need you to listen to me and to validate me. I don't know if I need your advice right now. I need to sit for a second and think about it, or I just need to talk it through, and then we'll see as we go. And if you say something that I don't like, I'll just tell you I don't like that, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not personal.
Not personal. Absolutely. And to just, when they're sharing something, to sit and just hear it and listen and receive it. And, you might have something you want to say in return, but if the timing isn't right, or your child said, I really need some space, it's important to give them the space. And then, a lot of times parents will say, well, does that mean I never get to say? I'm a parent. I want to say I care. So, you revisit it later, right?
Right.
I don't say it that day, right? But
That's a great point. I think we all feel the rush to get in what we need to say in that moment, because it just kind of feels a chance to. You
exactly.
can bring it back up, right? That's the important piece. You can always bring it back up, and it may be more effective to wait to bring it back up,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So I think maybe it's time that we just, wrap up a little. If anyone has any questions, we would love to answer them. We're more than happy to take questions. So, Alice, just to throw out some, wrap up some tips, and go through
Mm-hmm.
what, some of the main points that we discussed. What kind of tips and tools would you really, encourage parents to use with their children to really effectively communicate, especially going into a summer that is very stressful for young adults?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think, as parents, we're the slate. We're sort of holding the space in the home. So just do a little, just get in touch with some of the things that maybe trigger you about the summer as a parent, before even getting to the kids, because that might be the thing that we project onto them and we don't realize. So just get in touch with, like, all right, what are the things that, like, that trigger you? And remember, they're yours. They're not they're not your child's necessarily. I would say before the summer to sit with your child and ask them, and not just ask them about their triggers, but like, also we're not just problem solvers and troubleshooters as parents, but we're encouragers and cheerleaders. Like, what do you enjoy about the summer? What do you like
Right.
doing? Oh, you love tennis? Great. Do you have a game? What are you going to do? So talk about the things also, because that's something else I tend to hear from young adults is, my parents all mostly what they want to know is, who'd you go with? Who'd you talk to? Did you have fun? Everything about the
Right.
socializing. So get
Right.
interested in your child and ask them, definitely, like, what are some
Right.
of your pressures? Are you comfortable talking about them with me? Because I really want to respect them, and I want to be able to be there for you in a way that's helpful for you. Remember the good, lean into the positive. Ask them, timing. When is a good time to talk about
Right.
this? Right? How do you think I could be helpful to you? You can even, like, make a code word, like, like
I love
something
that.
like, when your parent walks in and tell me blah, 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 blah. And, you say, like, like, I don't know, like this, like, out, or, you make a signal, make it light too, right? It doesn't have to be so serious. But I think for the parents, be sensitive, be better listeners, manage your own feelings. When you feel the anxiety on your end, that may be the time for you to put a pin on it, because you may not say something that's going to be helpful. So really get to see, like, oh, do I feel like I have to say this to my child? That's probably the time you don't. You take a deep breath,
Right.
and you can revisit it when you're calm. But I think the preparing is important, the asking, the not assuming that your child is you. I think those things
Right.
are important.
Right. Right. I love that. And for the young adults, some of the things that I would say is set those boundaries and don't be afraid, right? With your parents, and especially going into the summer with yourself, right? What am I comfortable doing? Who am I comfortable being with? Who am I comfortable talking with? Have that support person, even if it's not your parent, even if it's your best friend, or even if it's a coworker, or somebody that you feel that you really trust, a mentor. Have that person and talk to them, be open and have that outlet to go to. And I think, the biggest piece, for both parties, space. Taking that space when you feel you need it.
Absolutely. The space is, just, it's respect for each other, and it's, to allow people to just navigate their own experience. And then ultimately, I think that, that brings people closer because they know that, they can work through it on their own, and their parents are respecting their space and their experience.
Right.
So, and to
Right.
keep at
And,
it.
and find the things that make you happy, right? For both
Oop,
you feel like,
Bonnie. Oh, good. You froze.
am I here? Okay.
Definitely.
Find the things, right, that make you feel good about yourself and you feel happy and, you feel calm and, utilize those things.
Absolutely. Get out of your head. If you find yourself obsessing, take a walk,
Right.
zip the lip, practicals, write it down, but I think a lot of
Exactly.
forgiveness and a lot of patience with each other and a lot of deep breaths,
Yes.
be really
Yes.
helpful.
Yes. And hopefully, this will be, the first of many talks that we will be, having on this topic, and really opening up so that we can, start to really look at this and look at the communication and look at the parents and their kids and, work through some of the struggles that they may be dealing with.
Absolutely. I think it's fantastic that SBH is here to, provide that for the young adults and for the parents, because it's like you said, it's stress on both sides, but, being able to, get together and have a space to talk about those things definitely lets the steam out before we get to, the people we love.
Right.
So you guys are doing a great
Right.
job, and
Thanks.
thank you for inviting me to have this conversation with you.
Thank you
I think it was,
for joining us. We really, really, we were so honored to have you here.
no, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm honored to be here with you. Thank you, Bonnie.
Yes. And thank you everyone for tuning in.
Yep. And any
Okay.
questions, right? Feel free
Yes.
to.
Any suggestions, any questions, let us know. Any other topics that you want us to be talking about, any suggestions, just let us know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's great. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.